right. Welcome to the Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee. This is June 12th. We're meeting primarily to discuss the 10-year telecom plan and then a few other items from judiciary and ADS. First item agenda is trying to figure out when our next meeting is. I'd like to try to do something in about a month out. So that probably puts us towards the middle of June.
July.
Yes, that one. So if folks have their schedules available, perhaps we can try and nail down some options for that. Let's see. Probably would like the 18th or 19th work for folks. It's a little bit more than a month out, but
Is that a Monday? I'm trying to.
19th is a Friday.
I'm away that week.
Okay.
So I wouldn't be back to the 21st, second, whatever that is.
The next best one for me would probably be the 11th of July.
I have Elcar.
Is that an all-day thing?
It's a 10 a.m. to noon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would the afternoon work?
Yeah.
And then you're already in the building anyway?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's tentatively plan for the 11th. And we'll plan on picking up at 1 to give folks lunch. And I'll check with Rep Priestley right now.
Right.
No worries. I was stuck in the same track. And Senator Brock later. So we were talking about our next meeting, would July 11th, that's a Thursday, afternoon, tentatively work. And Rep Sibilia, can you hear us? Can you confirm or deny whether the 11th will work?
I have a standing work meeting at 4 o'clock on Thursday, so I need to be done in order to participate remotely with that.
Okay. Would 1 to 4 potentially work for you if you're able to do it remotely again?
Yep.
No.
Or in person, and I could do in person and participate in this other meeting remotely, but I just need to be free for it.
Okay. Let's see.
Teaching on Thursdays.
Okay. Is there a day of the week that works better?
Pretty much every day except for Thursday. The one day that's solid teaching.
Would shifting it to Monday the 8th work for folks?
Yep. Mr. Mike.
Rep Sibilia, would the 8th work?
Looking now.
Okay.
It appears I have an afternoon meeting that day.
Okay.
It doesn't look like the 8th works. I wonder if a doodle poll would be in order.
Yeah.
Maybe with Mike doing that for us.
Okay. We'll try to nail down a few more possibilities. If folks are able to email Mike and myself any like firm like no's, that'll give us a few more options. Mike, are you aware of anything going on in the building, that like any construction or anything that would impact our schedule?
Not off the top of my head, but I'll check with Sergeant at Arms and we can fix some of that. We'll always have meeting space, but.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Then next is getting into the telecom plan. What I'd like is for Maria to join us, please, and give us a brief review of the statute. It is posted on our website, the specific statute about the telecom plan, but having a legislative council give us a review and kind of summary. Appreciate it.
Nice.
Nice shot.
Good morning, everyone. Maria Royal with Legislative Council. And I know you're mindful of the time, so I won't go into too much detail, but Mike was kind enough to post a copy of the statute on the webpage. You have a hard copy. There are probably some extras just in case you want to refer to it at any point, but I'll just do a broad overview about the 10-year telecom plan, which has been in existence since 1987, but there have been revisions to the statute and the goals of the state since then. But essentially, it's a planning document prepared by the Department of Public Service, who you will be hearing from, that looks at how the state can build out telecom networks, voice and broadband to all consumers in the state in all areas of the state in a way that takes advantage of any emerging trends and needs. So that's the big picture. Again, it's prepared by the department with the assistance of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, the Agency of Digital Services, and the Agency of Transportation. So in terms of preparing the plan, before the plan is actually, the preliminary plan is prepared, the department is required to do a few things, which I'm sure you're going to hear about, but I'll just go through them quickly. One is an overview looking ahead of kind of the demographics of the state and kind of the economic forecasts about what the trends are and incorporating that into any planning. Surveys, the department's required to do surveys of Vermonters, businesses, and residences to determine what their needs are. Mostly that's with their broadband speeds, as you know, that's an important factor. And in particular, when doing those surveys, looking at specific sectors of the economy, like educational needs, healthcare, emergency services, and workforce training. And then an assessment of the current state of the infrastructure that we already have, looking at state-owned and managed networks. That's more on the IT project side of things and incorporating any of those projects with the existing technological networks, geographic assessments of what's available in all areas of the state, opportunities for sharing infrastructure like open access, neutral hosts, so that all companies can pool resources, work together in the most efficient way to build out and make services available. And also taking into consideration, as we know, like FirstNet, the public safety network for that was funded primarily by the federal government, making sure that initiatives like that are incorporated in the planning and design of Vermont's networks. And the use of right-of-way, trying to leverage the state-owned rights-of-way in any way that's might also further broadband build out. So that's kind of an overview of what's being looked at prior to actually developing the plan. And in addition, what I don't have here, but is just ensuring that the plan is consistent with the state's goals. So that number one goal that you often hear about is that every Vermonter, every business and residence has access to 100 symmetrical, that's 100 download, uploads, broadband speeds. And this, and the date has changed over time. So in current statute, that goal is the end of this year. So, and then there are other kind of state goals and, or, you know, I'm just going to mention them, you know, of ensuring that not only universal availability, but, you know, looking at affordability, looking at mobile telecom services in communities and along the corridors of the state, quality, looking at, again, at open access, competitive choice for consumers. So these are kind of the overall state policies that are set in statute. So then just in terms of the process, very quickly, it's supposed to be a participatory planning process. The department holds numerous public hearings and involves, and so if you're looking on page 2, subsection D, you'll just see a list of kind of all of the providers and entities that are specifically called out to participate, and of course, any member of the public. And then in E, subsection E, prior to actually adopting the plan, as I mentioned, there's a preliminary plan that's prepared and also subject to public comment. The department shall review and consider all comments received prior to preparing a final draft. And those comments are either incorporated or specifically addressed. There are then at least 4 public hearings across the state on the final draft. And there is one public hearing held jointly with the committees of the General Assembly designated by the General Assembly for that purpose. So usually the subject matter committees of jurisdiction. And so finally, the plan is adopted every 3 years. There's an opportunity to do a major revision if necessary. And so that brings us to now. You have a plan to review, and you're going to hear about that.
Any quick questions on the statute for legislative council? Thank you. Perfect time.
Okay.
Please.
Okay.
And Christine, would you have comments for us today or?
I'll place support challenge, yeah.
Oh, with them or Kevin?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Hunter Thompson, Director of Telecommunications and Connectivity for the Public Service Department.
Charity Commissioner of the Department of Public Service, and just to explain the order of show, Director Thompson has been superintending the plan. So I thought it was best that the committee hear directly from him as much as possible. I'm here to answer tricky questions perhaps that the committee has that perhaps Mr. Thompson should not undertake. And Director Hallquist has been a very wonderful ally in furthering our broadband deployment in the state, is here as well because it's a reflection of how much the plan focuses on that broadband deployment that's underway.
Yeah, I'll provide a summary to talk about how the fiber backbone supports the telecom.
Precisely. So Director Thompson, take it.
So I had a short overview presentation that we gave at our public hearings for the plan that I'll give you probably about 10 minutes if I go quickly. Can I share that in the Zoom meeting here? Figure out how to do that. Oh, here we go. Maybe this doesn't let us use Zoom. Let's see. So from the beginning. All right, so this slide deck will provide a brief overview of the planning process and the development. The agenda for this is generally to go over the plan context, the research and analysis piece, changes we made to the plan based on feedback from others, some findings and recommendations, and then a brief overview of the outreach process we did with regard to the public hearings. So as far as the plan context, the plan is guided by the telecommunication goals in 30 VSA 202C, which I think Maria just talked about briefly, provides an analysis and recommendations supporting each goal. It's created in accordance with 30 VSA 202D, and it builds on the momentum created by the recent federal resources, for instance, ARPA, CPF, and the BEAD program. We believe firmly the plan addresses all statutory requirements, but places special focus on elements not specifically addressed by the simultaneous BEAD planning and funding that's ongoing with the BCBP. So the qualitative research underpins the plan. So the landline and cellular phone surveys were a statistically significant sampling of residents. That's a technical term in the survey world, apparently. So we met that goal. We had online surveys of Vermont businesses, healthcare partners, public safety professionals, interviewed over 55 public and private stakeholders for their input on the plan. We had a statewide mobile wireless engineering and coverage analysis done for one of the recommendations of the plan. And we had a scientific input output workforce gap analysis based on the broadband construction spending that we anticipate in the state over the next few years in order to get the wireline deployment completed. For the public participation process, we did statewide live streaming and website banners on WCAX. We had public hearings with remote options in March. These included American ASL, sign language interpreters, and closed captioning so that anyone could participate. We had direct emails to all the interviewees, encouraging them to review the draft plan and soliciting their input. We set up a dedicated email address and an on-site online form for written content submissions throughout March 2024. We collaborated with the AMOs for these public hearings to try to get the word out so that they would increase participation. And that resulted in us receiving over 50 pages of feedback from the public during the public comment period. So based on those feedback, we made changes to the final draft version of the plan. We did not go directly from the preliminary draft to the final draft. We incorporated what we heard and we did our best to amend the plan as we saw fit. We updated section 7 to add clarity and context around the possibility of fiber providers going carrier grade and enterprise grade. We added recommendations for a workforce incentive program for broadband construction positions. We added details on priority and preemptive services on the work the Public Safety Communications Task Force is doing. We updated information on the state right-of-way permit and fee selection criteria for the mobile wireless grant pilot program. And we added some additional timelines and success measures in the action plan. Here's a brief overview of our findings. The households with access to 100 by 100 rose roughly 35,000 premises between 2021 and 2023. Oops, go back, sorry. Vermont needs to grow its broadband construction workforce. I think we all realize that as we're about to do this large fiber build out. So between 2018 and 2022, Vermont's broadband deployment workforce actually shrank by 12%. So there was a workforce analysis, and we anticipate that building $700 million of fiber will require growing the workforce by about 750 workers in various sectors. We can get into that. The fiber infrastructure owners may need to bury portions of the network in the next 10 to 15 years as part of utility hardening, but the costs and responsibilities for this are still unclear, whether it is directly on the utility to bury their lines, whether or not that's going to include a cable to bury the fiber next to the utility. And finally, the Agency of Transportation no longer assesses a zero-cost fee in unserved areas. I believe that decreases the overall efficiency of deployment in Vermont. The take is that additional costs to deploy fiber do nothing but stifle on fiber deployment. As far as the mobile wireless piece, there's been higher speeds but little actual expansion in service area over the past couple of years. So 80% of the surveyed businesses indicated Vermont mobile wireless coverage is inadequate for their business needs. 64% of the surveyed residents agree that the state should use public funds to improve wireless mobile coverage. I look at wireless coverage similar to the electrification of Vermont. We're getting to the point where wireless coverage is a basic utility, just like internet access is a basic utility. And it took the input from the state and the feds to actually expand electricity in the whole state. I think I'm not really old, but Vermont was fully electrified after I was born. So this is a fairly new thing. Mobile download speeds have increased 6-fold since 2018, but again, the coverage area has seen a limited expansion. And the engineering analysis actually showed that small 50-foot and sub 50-foot wireless facilities can make big progress in closing the gaps of the first 50% of those unserved areas. So the highlights of those engineering analysis for the wireless piece was that we assume ubiquitous fiber along the roadways will reduce the cost of mobile deployment. And that's something that's changed since the last time this was tried with Coverage Co. Coverage Co. often found itself relying on slow DSL, giving a poor experience for end users, and no one wants to use a service that only works sporadically or poorly. So the certified engineer estimated that it was roughly $240,000 per 140-foot traditional macro tower, and that it would be about $97,000 per 50-foot pole-based radio tower. And so that's what this analysis is based on, is using smaller 50-foot pole-based radio towers. It looked like 98 macro towers that are 140 feet tall for an estimated cost of 25 million could close 50% of those gaps. Or 107 wireless facilities that are under 50 feet or 10 million could close that same 50% of those gaps. The public safety system continues to evolve and mobile coverage continues to remain an issue. So in discussions, the Public Safety Communication Task Force was established in February to evaluate a possible consolidation of the PSAPs. Over 50 FirstNet sites have been deployed. However, only under 6% of the public safety respondents reported that those actually make a large difference and that they don't lose coverage on their job. Some goals in the SCIP, the statewide communication interoperability plan, may only be addressed with additional funding. There's just not enough money for them to do everything they would like to do. Whoops.
Hunter, I think I missed page 11.
Yeah, I said I keep going back. I can't get the meeting part off my screen, so I have to move it around. So where are we?
Page 11.
8, 9, 10. 11. There we go. Sorry. Apologize for that. Yes. All right, I found out how to minimize it. Could be doing better. So the affordability challenges that we face with the sunset and the affordable connectivity program. I apologize, this is an important piece. The ACP expired in May. It's officially done now. They're not making any more payments. And we found that about 24,000 Vermont households are going to lose that $30 a month subsidy. That's a big deal. 16% of the respondents in our surveys under the age of 45 reported that the cost of their mobile cell phone bill often or always affected what essential items they could afford. We're in a position where people are deciding to pay their cell phone bill or deciding to buy something other than ramen noodles for the month to eat. It's not a good position to be in. 12% of the people with a disability and 30% of income-based government assistance recipients participated in the federal ACP program. Although stakeholders strongly note that both fixed and mobile connectivity are important, the ACP only covered one of those. So they couldn't get both through the federal ACP program. Healthcare workers noted that without continuous access to devices, unhoused Vermonters continue to struggle with access to care. I take a little jaunt here. This is something that I find very important. The fact that we have locations where large populations of unhoused individuals can't access emergency services is just a disservice to the citizens of the state. It drives up healthcare costs, and it's a disservice to the people who potentially want to access these services, whether they be unhoused under the bridge overpass if you drive on Route 2, or whether they be unhoused somewhere else. But in order to make government services accessible to this population, we need to bring them service to where they are and not ask them to come into our own systems and our own locations to get these services. We need to meet people where they are to address these issues, in my opinion. We already went through the PSAP stuff, so I'll skip over that. And status could do better and align to current state strategy. So the broadband speed definitions of deployment parameters are not necessarily cohesive across the statute, as we see in Act 71 with 100 over 100 versus 100 over 20 and some of the stuff in 202 D and C. The statutorily mandated end date for the BCBB is before the expectation that the BEAD program activities are likely to be completed. And the statutory goals, as Maria mentioned, were drafted about 40 years ago and contain some overlapping and non-specific language. So here's a brief summary of our key recommendations. The plan has much more detail than this, this quick PowerPoint. That's the board. The state should take a range of actions to make wireline deployment more efficient. So we believe AOT should continue issuing zero-cost fees in unserved areas until the state achieves universal 100 over 100 access. We believe that we could scale training programs to the indicated levels to ensure workforce is skilled, qualified, and sufficient to execute the necessary construction. And we should lead a study among infrastructure owners to process the costs of the processing costs of burying the infrastructure, the impact to the ISPs, and the fiber home financials and opportunities for savings and alignment. We put some performance expectations in there, and those are largely the groups that we expect to be involved in this. This is not something that PSD would take the lead in on all of these recommendations, and this is not something that PSD would actually be tasked with doing. For instance, leading an infrastructure processing costs to vary infrastructure along the roadway is not necessarily something PSD. That would involve transportation, the BCBB, Department of Labor for working with the workforce people to get skilled training and necessary construction workers on site. Should encourage small facility wireless deployments via pilot grant program. So again, and I think we had mentioned this in the past plan, not necessarily a small facility, a pilot program. To expand wireless, we should pilot a small facility sub 50-foot mobile wireless grant program to address coverage gaps while preserving the landscape aesthetic. We'd like to request, and I will be requesting eventually, not right now, a few $1 million to do this pilot and see if we can get this done. We should update the data collection practices to strengthen the planning, measure the mobile coverage progress. One of those is to repeat the 2022 mobile broadband drive test. So we actually have that started. We are hoping to put out RFP for that in the next month or so, and we'll be doing that again. Establish some crowdsourcing partners so that we can get more Class A2-3 roads. We've also got that started. I've worked with some people in the private sector. Each said that they're interested in helping, just so that they can map and get further coverage. And then a request that we had internally was that the 248 permit process recipient notify the public service department after the tower is built. Currently, that's not a requirement in 248, but we find that as we map the tower across the state, we don't always necessarily know when the 248A process has been completed. They give us the design, they say we're going to build the tower, we go through our process, and the PUC approves it, and then we're kind of stuck, and we have to actually at times go out and say, it's been 2 years, did they actually put a tower up there or did they not? Because people are still reporting that there's no cellular service in that general area. We should ensure affordability of both wireline and wireless service for low-income residents. So there's a whole section in the plan about a state-funded ACP program. We believe we should define affordable as 2% of monthly income for fixed and mobile broadband spending. After the analysis was done, that works out to a subsidy of $67 a month to low-income Vermonters for both wireline and wireless broadband subscriptions. And we believe that we should provide fully subsidized mobile devices and subscriptions to unhoused Vermonters to ensure continuous access to services. Strengthen the state's emergency communication systems. Using the PSAP consolidation analysis to inform the Public Safety Communication Task Force FUD. When federal grant money is unavailable, the state should dedicate sufficient funding to execute the SCIP. And using a grant-making leverage to ensure resiliency measures are built for new deployments. We've minimized it, but I'll have to move the bottom from that, so I think we also believe that some modernization of the statute to better guide the practice and align with state strategies could be done. We should ensure the goals in 202C and 202C are specific and aligned with Act 71. This kind of goes to the speed issue where we have 100 over 100 versus 100 over 20. We should extend the VCB sunset date to provide adequate oversight and monitoring of the BEAD deployments. As mentioned before, it's not expected that the BEAD money will be fully deployed and the actions will be completed by the current sunset date of the VCBB. And we should consider aligning statutory goals with the ongoing deployment strategies. So one of the things is that the statute actually mentions competition, right? But it's our belief that we're not necessarily looking for competition. We don't want this. We don't want to force 3 fiber providers to be 4 miles in the back roads in northern Vermont. What we want is a benefits competition. We want lower costs, higher speed, and better customer service. And so we believe the statute could be updated to reflect that, as opposed to specifically saying we want competition amongst the providers. Thank you.
Questions, can you briefly address, we received a memo from the auditor who had some additional questions and concerns. Could you briefly speak to, how that was incorporated and potential adjustments?
I can read some of it, and I will let you speak to a little bit of it, maybe if you prefer, since I'm a not always a mixed background, so. I'll start with the easy one. So on part 3 of the auditor's memo, thank you. We appreciate the auditor recognizing that we made updates and that all of the statutory goals that were outlined were met in this plan. We'll do the other part, which is easier. Part 2 of the auditor's memo, which references the fees. I think we used the word waiver in the initial plan. We went back through, looked at statute, and we have read the second criticism in the auditor's letter. We appreciate the feedback, and we've updated the 10-year telecom plan. This was just done on Monday to remove the references to the word waiver. We testified on this topic. We listened to testimony on this topic, and we used the language that was commonly used. We recognize that the word waiver is used in statute and has a specific meaning and specific requirements around it. Therefore, we've updated the plan to remove the verbiage and replace it with the language used by AOT in their memo to the auditor dated April 14th, 2024. I have the places in the thing. It looks like we made changes on page 17 to remove the word waiver. We made changes on page 195 in a number of places and replaced it with a zero cost fee, which is how AOT had described it. And we made changes on page 327 in response to public comment that the word waiver was used. So we've removed that language. The first part, I will let you speak to before I
Can I interrupt? I see Rep. Sibilia has her hand up. Is that about this specific or Rep. Sibilia?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I not sure if Maria covered this. I was in transition during her presentation. What is our obligation since we can't write legislation or pass bills? What is Jitoc's obligation related to this presentation that we're hearing this morning?
Maria, could you answer that?
It's interesting the way the statute's written, it refers to the committees, the subject matter jurisdiction. So for now, I think it's just oversight. It's within your jurisdiction to hear about telecom planning and development. So I don't think I need to check on this, but I don't think you have the authority to actually approve the plan. I think it's the subject matter committees, Senate Finance, House Environment and Energy. You actually have the hearing where they would, so for now, it's just your general jurisdiction over telecom planning in the state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Was that the only question you had?
That's the only question I have at this point. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator?
Unfortunately, I was not here for the first few minutes of Maria's presentation. And so my question is the approval, legislative approval by the committees of jurisdiction, what dates, if any, are applicable?
For me and Maria, I believe.
That's for Maria.
I'm sorry, so what dates are?
In other words, by when does that approval, is there a specific as far as when that approval has to take place? I thought it was before July 1, but I may be wrong.
I don't believe there is a date referenced in the statute. So there's supposed to be 4 public hearings. At least one of which shall be held jointly with the committees of jurisdiction. But other than that.
Well, I
It's
thought,
not specific
maybe,
date.
correct me if I'm wrong, and in fact, the department may have some thoughts on this, but I thought that prior to July 1, that committees of jurisdiction had to give their okay for the plan to go live.
Well, that may be with the appropriation for the plan, there might be a date there, so let me.
Yeah.
If Hunter doesn't know off the top of his head, I can look up that.
I'm not sure I recognize July 1, or I think June 30th is the statute.
June 30 is
Is the last
date
day.
in the statute, and that's the last day of, for what?
I'd have to look, but it needs to be presented.
Now, I'm just concerned about what timelines, if any, exist that say we have to act, or by we, I mean the legislature, to bless the plan so that the plan goes live, as opposed to it simply being written and not being legislatively reviewed in any formal manner, and then going live notwithstanding that. So that's my concern to the question.
Mr. Chair, if I may speak to it, June Tierney, Commissioner. Senator, I will have to look at the statute and make sure that my recollection isn't erroneous. But my recollection is that in fact, what you just described is the state of play right now. That there is a mandatory legislative hearing, which is what Jitoc is doing today. But there is no date by which the legislature per se gives a thumbs up or thumbs down to the plan. My recollection is there has been quite a bit of discussion over the years as to whether that should be the case. And Maria may be right. This is what we need to check. There may be a date associated with the use of an appropriation for doing the plan.
Normally, when we see JTOC involved, JTOC is involved in terms of part of the appropriation trigger that approach puts in a spending bill that relates to technology. But as I recall, the legislation, it's the committees of jurisdiction that have the responsibility. And to the best of my knowledge, there's nothing scheduled for the committees of jurisdiction, at least for finance and Senate.
Again,
Look at this.
to the best
And
of
so the
my,
question is this plan, which is this not supposed to be done before the plan goes live? And that's a July 1 date.
my memory again is that the department is supposed to adopt a plan by July 1. It's not that the legislature is supposed to approve one.
But a legislature and the legislative committees review of it is an integral part of the process in the statute in terms of public hearings as well as legislative hearings. And the question I also have is, does this constitute the legislative hearing? Because we're not the committee of jurisdiction as far as the plan is concerned.
To my knowledge, this hearing today is that hearing.
I don't know. Well, Maria, I think that's a very important point as we're getting close to July 30th is that what the statute says? And is this the quote legislative hearing that is in fact required?
I'll read the language of the statute.
Okay.
Because I think it might be a little bit ambiguous. As you know, this Jitoc has jurisdiction over broadband generally. And you have the standing committees of jurisdiction that also review broadband. So the statute says at least one public hearing shall be held jointly with committees of the General Assembly designated by the General Assembly for this purpose. That language predated the formation of this committee. And so in the past, it has been Senate Finance and whatever House committee had jurisdiction. So I don't think there has been a change, although I recognize that this new joint committee has also some jurisdiction here. So before giving a final answer off the top of my head right here, which is probably not advisable, I think I just want to check in. I want to actually see the language of the appropriation. Phone a friend, make sure there wasn't some understanding of legislative intent that is not reflected in the statute. So.
And again, it is a case, at least the way that reads now, in which a committee of the legislature will be part of the review process. In other words, we'll listen to it just as the public does, but there's no specific approval, disapproval, or action that committee takes, the way the statute reads right now.
That's correct. That is correct. And I think Representative Sibilia was referencing that this committee or any other standing committee doesn't have the authority. You just have to hear and respond and comment, and then it's up to the department to respond. But
Will you be able to get back to us with something for July 1?
I'm going to try to look when we get a little bit of a break and move on to another subject and
Right.
check in again. So hopefully today,
Okay.
before you leave.
Thank you. Rep. Sibilia, I saw your camera come on. Do you have another question?
I do, and it's for the department, if I may.
Please.
Thank you very much for your work and for your presentation this morning. I'm hopeful that you can get the presentation to Mike, so that that can be posted on the website. My question for you is, should the legislature expect that these recommendations that you are making will come in as well-formed legislative proposals in the next session?
Like to make them, yes?
I think we need to be clear that what we would like to do is one thing. What is ultimately determined to be the administration's agenda can sometimes be another. And that process will unfold over the next several months. But these recommendations are embodied in this plan because they represent this agency's best advice as to how policy in the state should evolve. Whether it happens this session or the next session, sitting here today, I can't say. But it certainly is our intent to pursue these things. You have to understand that we have to advocate for our policy initiatives in the legislature, first with the administration, and then we advocate for them with you during your session.
I'd like to change my answer.
You gave the right answer. You're absolutely, and believe me, I hear from Hunter regularly about these things, and I'm pleased to hear the things I'm hearing.
Thank you. And Commissioner, could I ask you to speak to some of the rest of the memo from the auditor?
Yes, I welcome the exchange that we've had with the auditor and certainly appreciate as well his continued attention and feedback on planning. We've heard from Hunter that we have taken it very seriously. I think there is an honest, it's not a disagreement, but there's an honest, different approach to the issue of performance measures. And the auditor takes one view, and I respect that. The view that's embodied in the plan is my view, which is that authority is commensurate with responsibility. We have put the performance expectations and measures in the plan that we feel we can, with our authority as it presently exists, be held accountable for. Other performance measures that evidently the auditor has in mind are things that others are wanting to clarify. But if this is a question of, determining that we should have 30% more expanded wireless coverage by 2027, that is not something that I feel can responsibly be put into this plan, because those are things that turn on aspects of authority and financing over which the department has no control. And I might add too, that what we do in this space is a matter of policy and our public statements, and perhaps more importantly, how we conduct that discussion can have a serious impact on how the state is perceived in the federal government, for instance, where the state is highly dependent, not just on continued robust funding, but also their continued belief that the state is committed to the direction that it takes in programs such as BEAD, and that there is widespread consensus behind those programs and those initiatives. In other words, how we are seen to conduct ourselves in these discussions about telecommunications weighs in the deliberations of the FCC, for instance, as to whether to continue to do things like accommodate the waiver requests that Director Hallquist has been quite successful in driving through at the federal level. So I'm just cautioning that the state keep in mind that when it decides on things such as performance metrics, that it not set itself up to look incompetent when those metrics are not met, to be blunt.
Thank you. And Christine, as a thoroughly invested member of this process, do you have anything to add or comment on about?
Yeah, I will say that, the ubiquitous fiber optic infrastructure is a foundational infrastructure that's necessary in order to solve the cell problem. And there's two reasons for that. One is the amount of data, and Hunter referred to it, the data backhaul requirements that a cell tower has can't be met with the other technologies. And when we talk about waiver requests, one of the things we were very successful on, which we fought for a number of years on, was to get all wireless classified as underserved from the federal government standpoint. We're one of the few, we led the nation in that one. There are only 4 states that were given that waiver, but that really gets to the issue of cell coverage, because cell coverage and fixed wireless use the same thing. They use radio frequency. And if you look at the areas that are not served with cell today, they're in pockets. I think of Belvedere, Vermont, that's sitting in a pocket. The radio frequency can't get through the hills. So these small 50-foot towers, the antennas on top of poles, are going to be critical to that solution, and they require fiber optic broadband. I'm proud to say that, we're the only state that's committed to these high level goals, and we're way ahead of the nation in terms of meeting those goals. And if you look at where we were in 2020, we had about 20% of the addresses that were served by fiber. By the end of this summer, we'll be at 50%, and we'll be at ubiquitous coverage by the end of 2028. So we're well on the way on that path, but it is, my point is, it is a critical foundation to solve the cell problem.
Good. Do you and your team have any questions or asks of Jitoc here today?
Unless you can give me a few $1 million to get some of these pilots going.
I second that.
Fair enough.
Dollars? Is that good friends?
I just have a comment to make, if I may.
Please.
And that is, when there is resolution about whether this meeting today satisfies the statutory requirement in your view, I'd appreciate hearing back from Jitoc on that. From the department's perspective, having this meeting today is following suit with the prior two plans review and approval processes. So the department has had no notice that anything else might have been expected at this point. And as long as the department is deemed, which I consider it to be deemed, to have met its statutory obligations to deliver a plan by July 1, I'm happy to engage further with the committees of jurisdiction as you see fit. But that does not disturb the fact that the department has met its statutory obligations.
And for clarity, my understanding is that this meets those requirements, and we were required to hear about it, but not thumbs up or thumbs down on it. So if Maria comes back with a different interpretation or some other portion of statute that may be triggered, I believe this particular one that we reviewed, I would agree with your assessment.
I mean, the state has no interest in having a plan that is not satisfying committees of jurisdiction.
Right.
But there comes a point where process does have to be followed in the statute as written, and this issue has been kicked around for some time now, the thumbs up, thumbs down thing. And so it would be time to clarify that, but it needs to be recognition that it needs to be clarified, and not that the department is called out for having been remiss in its responsibilities.
Understood. Senator, did you have?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do. I'm looking at the statute 202G, and it says at least one public hearing shall be held jointly with the committees designated for this purpose. And as we said, it could be Senate Finance and whatever the House committee is. I don't see in our agenda for today any indication that we would be adopting this plan, for example. So I don't think that's fair to any members of the public. Are there any members of the public here? In fact, I would say it's hard to have a public hearing if the public has not shown up. So I feel like we're not moving statute at all, by any means.
That may be
Through the
Senator.
warning, through the way the statute is written, through the fact that I think if I contacted the chair of Senate Finance right now and said, hey, did you know we're having this adoption hearing? They might be a little surprised. So I object strongly to that interpretation of the statute, as well as what you just said, of making this a public hearing and counting this as the fourth public hearing that the statute requires. I guess I would ask maybe Hunter if you could tell me how many people attended the public hearings, both on the preliminary draft as well as the final draft, and how many of them were unique actors?
We had minimal participation in both the preliminary and the final draft. I don't believe we had one attendant for the final draft hearing at our St. Albans meeting. Out of the three, this is a fourth. I don't think we have any public attendance at this one. For the preliminary, I think we had maybe 3 or 4 individual people who were 3 meetings.
That was like one of them, right?
As you read
You're
that.
counted in that number.
Thank you, yes. So I find that concerning as well. I think something that costs this much and is this important to so many Vermonters should have better public outreach and better attendance. And that the output you received can in no way be comprehensive because you did not have a robust attendance. Any of those hearings, much less all of them. Hugely concerning to me. In Auditor Hoffer's letter, he talks about the telecommunications fees and the rights of ways. I believe in your presentation, it is slide 15. Is this statement relevant to what he's asking for? It says AIT should continue issuing zero cost fees in unserved areas.
Yes.
I have a huge concern with that. Other states, I'm told, charge rent for the use of their rights of way. You know, it's all about location, location, location. When you want to string fiber, you want to string it in the most efficient way possible, and that is along the roadways, I would think.
Can I address that? You know, let me just talk about the challenge of serving the unserved areas today. And this gets to the reason that we don't want to we don't want to have multiple fibers coming to these rural unserved areas. The unserved, what we're looking at today in the unserved areas is about 6 houses passed per mile, 6 residents per mile. So if you get less than 4 paying customers per mile, even if you gave the network away, you wouldn't be able to afford the operation and maintenance costs. So we're very challenged in order to have sustainable business cases serving these unserved areas today. So any fees you add on to that adds to the challenge of that business case. We really need to get, 4 out of 6 of those passings to be paying customers. And by the way, it costs less than $2,000 a passing to serve areas in Chittenden County, and it costs $10,000 a passing to serve rural Vermont. So it's significantly more expensive to serve, which means the costs are higher, and we have more than double the low-income people. So that, because this is an unregulated, essentially unregulated monopolies, we end up with the cannibalization of these territories by the private providers taking the best addresses and leaving the poorest people, to serve those areas. So I strongly recommend not adding fees that contribute to the challenge of those low-income rural Vermonters.
And I guess my counter to that would be if we're charging fees for rights of way across Vermont, we're charging served areas as well, where you have many more people per mile. And the people who are benefiting are the shareholders in these utilities. We shouldn't be sponsoring the utilities' profit margin. We should be charging them the rents that they signed up to pay when they got their permits to put this fiber in, or any of their utilities in the rights of way to begin with. I just don't understand why we would not charge the fees that they expect us to charge and that other states do charge for access to all rights of way. We're not discriminating. We're not saying these unserved areas are going to be charged fees. We're asking for all of them to be charged. And so I would emphasize that I agree with the auditor. We need to be looking into that. We have all kinds of constraints as a state raising fees. These are fees that have been on the books for 17 years and not a penny has been collected, to my knowledge, in these rights of way. That was way before broadband came along, way before we knew we had unserved areas. This is a long-term problem of leaving money on the table, to my knowledge. Interested in hearing from other people what they know.
And real quick, and then I'll go to Representative Sibilia. I believe we passed something that starts charging those fees this year. And I don't know if it made it all the way through to the finish line or not.
Not to my knowledge.
No? Please.
I speak for a second. So H 657 tasked the Agency of Transportation, which is an agency that does charge the fee, just to be clear. Public Service Department is not assessing a fee on right of way. task the Agency of Transportation with doing a study to see how much it would cost to get a listing and a good inventory of everything that's in the right of way to see if the juice is worth the squeeze in that regard.
Representative Sibilia and then Senator, please.
Yeah, I believe that, Mr. Chair, that the House passed a version that did include those fees, and that did not come back from the Senate with that intact. I do want to just clarify and raised my hand, listening to the senator's comments, a couple of items. I'm worried about kind of perpetuating the misunderstanding that this plan is a construction plan. Construction of our fiber network is happening at the VCBB, and this is not a construction plan. This is a kind of assessment of where we're at and what is necessary in order to meet the statutory goals. It is not a plan that is required to be implemented. It is a plan that is utilized by the VCBB. It is utilized by a number of providers. It serves as kind of an assessment of where we're at. So I just want to make sure we're all clear about that. And also, we do not, this was the question that I wanted to be clear with Maria Royal on, we actually do not adopt this plan. That is not our job, and this is not an adoption hearing.
Maria stepped out of the room, so when she comes back, she can hopefully confirm that.
Yeah, that we have never adopted the plan. That has been an ongoing issue that we have some advocates in the building that have wanted us to, and it's been an ongoing bone of contention, but we have not adopted the plan in the past. The other item I would just note is in terms of participation, and I certainly would agree that we want robust participation. In my own following of the 10-year telecom plan, there has never been super robust participation. There have been, the kind of 2 or 3 typically folks that have shown up. We have seen robust participation where there are plans being built through the CUDs. So I'm not sure what the, I'm not sure that we should expect to see much more participation. The surveys that are a part of the telecom plan require us to go to the different agencies which are serving different constituencies to make sure that we're receiving information about various Vermonters' needs as a part of this plan. So while I agree, it would be great to have broader participation. Again, this is not an implementation plan. It's an assessment and analysis. The implementation plans and work actually are seeing quite robust public participation. So just wanted to offer that. And again, clarify that we are not taking an action. We are not able to take an action. In fact, this committee is unable to take any actions that are not specifically outlined in statute. And so just want to clarify where we are today with that. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Senator first.
Just on the issue of fees in the right of way and what we're doing, we did pass H 657, and it did include a provision that Secretary of Transportation was charged with doing a study as to what it would cost to do the right of way analysis necessary to even come up with fees in the first place. And I do recall in finance, we looked at that in considerable detail and heard from a number of witnesses. And among the problems, particularly as we looked at maps of where poles were, we found that weren't always where they were supposed to be. And the right of way was not always used in the way that was intended. And as a result, you had situations in which you may have a line or a cable that went one pole is in the right of way, one pole is not in the right of way, it's not where it's supposed to be. And some of the stuff is also buried. And there are, I think, real concerns were raised in testimony about the cost to calculate where these things were in order to be able to charge in the first place for them, and that the charge might outweigh, or the cost of doing the work to understand where things were might exceed the cost of recovery from taxation in the first place. And we want to get a good understanding of that before giving a go-ahead to do something that might not be as easily feasible as a lot of people seem to think that it is. And that's the purpose. That's the purpose of the study. And that was passed, and AOT was charged with that responsibility.
For what it's worth, having worked with the plats and the poles and stuff in the past, I can confirm that that's my experience as well.
Senator, I very much appreciate the clarification you just offered, because that supports with my recollection as well. And what you're seeing in the plan today is a policy recommendation that, on balance, you don't want to disincentivize the deployment of infrastructure that, by definition, absent it being under the auspices of the VCBB, meaning the CEDs, but for other players out there, you don't want to disincentivize their plans, their willingness to deploy infrastructure that complements what we're trying to do. But that is not an absolute. There may well be countervailing considerations, such as what Senator Renner has raised. These are times where revenues are very short, and so perhaps the state has to chase every dollar it can. But there just needs to be a realization that a decision to do that comes at the expense of creating a disincentive for folks who we do not regulate choosing to deploy infrastructure. And it may be hard to imagine today, but not too long ago, there was a time when the state was entirely dependent on the choices of those entities who were not regulated to deploy any infrastructure that would further broadband or wireless in the state. And so this is a good example of how progress often can be leaps and bounds, and what remains in our statutes maybe doesn't necessarily keep up. So the conversation you're having here, and that was had in committees, both in the House and the Senate this past session, are very healthy ones to continue to have. It does not surprise me in the least that the auditor might have a different view from what we, as policy experts on the industry and recognizing trends and incentives, might recommend to you. That was one piece of it that I wanted to comment on. The other is to Representative Sevilla's point, as perhaps Representative Sevilla and others are aware, the department has done significant work in the realm of public outreach this last year, particularly in 18 months really, with respect to renewable energy, for instance, and really trying different ways of reaching out and significantly or meaningfully interacting with the public to find out what they want in terms of their energy policy. And it continues to puzzle me that we are not meeting with similar success in the telecommunications realm. I don't believe we have done everything in that realm that we have done in the energy realm. That may be a function of funding, because we specifically budgeted for that 18-month outreach exercise with the energy plan. But with that said, the experts who assisted us with the preparation of this plan did do surveying of the Vermont population. So it's not as if this plan were developed without any input from the citizens we serve. But I can quite agree that having 2 or 3 folks show up, one person show up to a public hearing is not the outcome the department desires either. And you can certainly expect that the department will continue to look for ways to get that engagement that we're looking for. With that said, this is a public space. It was advertised as a public space, as hundreds of other hearings are in the state every year. And so in that sense, it is very much a public hearing.
I would agree that it's a public hearing, but even if the public isn't here. And you understand the issue of accountability. And that's what we're really talking about. When we talk about this plan, and I don't know how I've gone through several of these things over the years, we look at that, and I'm concerned that, and this is something I think the committee should be talking about, its recommendations to the committees of jurisdiction of where's the accountability for this? I realize that you are limited as a department in being able to actually implement things that require appropriations and the like. And that's a valid concern the department has on the one hand. On the other hand, I think one of our concerns is that why have a plan if whether or not you achieve what's in the plan, nobody measures it. And nobody comes back and reports we did it or we didn't do it. The reasons why may be, of course, all the things that you've mentioned. But we look at a plan is just it's a piece of paper that nobody pays attention to as a potential because there's no accountability for it. And I think accountability is something that has to be built in to any planning process. So you look back and you then determine, did you do what the plan called for you to do or didn't you? And yes, there may be plausible reasons, but I think that's an important issue. I think that's something that we should be talking about as an oversight committee, and that we should also be reporting back to the committees of jurisdiction with some recommendations as to what we should do about it.
I couldn't agree with you more, Senator. I think you have complete control and understanding of what is open to you in terms of the levers to be pulled to create what it is you are advocating for. And I suspect that there are many who will agree with you. It is not the state of play right now. Very respectfully, you've been so consistent on these positions, so I'm not surprised by anything you've said. Very respectfully, I do have to agree with Representative Sibilia that this plan that we're discussing today is not the action plan to which you're referring. And I think the moment is ripe to determine, do you want this plan to be an action plan? Certainly during the pandemic, we had a broadband action plan that was a supplement to the 10-year telecommunications plan. And it would be interesting to go back and to see what did we do with that, did we not? On the other hand, you also will recall, because you were in the trenches with me, how quickly facts and money facts evolved and completely swept off the table tools that we used to think about in terms of furthering our telecommunications build out in favor of what the legislature was able to create in Act 71. So these things do move quickly, and those action plans that we aspire to have a way of becoming outdated before they can be acted on. But with that said, I think the work of the VCBB and the work of the department in incorporating their actions and their plans into our telecom plan shows that there can be productive collaboration along those lines. The only thing I'm urging here today is that you give a care to what it sounds like, the discourse, and what it looks like to your federal partners. Because so much of what Vermont is doing is cutting edge, and you do not want to do things that would cause a loss of confidence. That's all I'm saying.
I understand what you're saying clearly on the one hand. On the other hand, the notion of having a plan on one hand and an action plan on the other, there's some internal conflicts.
Well, I disagree with you. If you care to hear the explanation, the plan is an atlas. It's a bird's eye view of the state of telecommunications, of the applicable law of telecommunications, the division of jurisdiction, what is federal, what is state, what public opinion is about what folks would like, what the needs are, how the agencies in government are situated to work with each other or not. I have always thought of it as an atlas or an encyclopedia. And very respectfully, again, Senator Brock, when telecommunications providers come to my office and talk to me about what they want to do in the state, they have looked at the 10-year plan. Here's the thing that tells potential investors, what would it mean for us to put money into Vermont? Where does the state see itself going? And that is very easily reconciled with an action plan that says, here's what we're going to do about cell service, or here's what we're going to try to do about cell service.
But I think the issue that I'm getting to is that atlas or that description or that background document, or however you define it, that includes those things, should lead to doing something about the issues that are raised in it.
Indeed.
And the two need to be integrally connected, one to the other, and that there should be a measurement to show the results of what's been done based on what's in the atlas and what's in. Now, this is not just an atlas or a definition of, this is a plan. You're saying in this quote plan that this is what we ought to be doing and moving forward on.
And the key word in that phrase is what we ought to be doing. And what the political will is to do those things, what the ability is of the state to come up with the requisite funding, what the ability is of the two chambers of the legislature to agree on those things, what the will is of the administration to advocate for them. Those are all unknown every time we enter the State House in January.
But there are also goals that in documents such as this, we indicate what we are recommending to the committees of jurisdiction to do.
This committee recommends to those committees of jurisdiction. This plan is the department recommending to the state.
And the question is, should there be a direct linkage so that we can determine whether or not the ideas in that plan, particularly those that say this is what we ought to do going forward, being implemented, or are they being ignored?
And I have every confidence that this committee will come to a decision as to what it wants to recommend to the committees of jurisdiction on that point. If you're asking me today, what I'm saying is you want an atlas like the one that we just prepared. And if you want a plan of the nature that you're describing and that linkage, you want a statute that says that.
That's correct. And that's the discussion, among other things, that we need to have as to whether or not we do a linkage of what is in the quote plan to actual achieving results in terms of implementing some of the recommendations that we perhaps have agreed to in the plan. And that also goes to the issue of whether or not the committees of jurisdiction do in fact have some role in agreeing that this is the plan that we want to adopt.
Now, you've gone one too far for me, but
I know.
I think we.
But I frankly don't like the notion of having plans that we simply ignore.
Well, we don't ignore them, Senator. As I just said,
They just don't get done.
I don't know that we can say that either. Look at the progress that has been.
We've made a lot of progress, but I don't know that have we made the progress on the basis of the last 10-year telecommunications plan or on the basis of a whole bunch of other things.
That is an issue I would want to look back at. There's so much of the terrain has changed from under us. It's hard to say when a plan is deficient or when a plan has been outdone by federal funding that was never on the horizon and the plan was designed.
Sure. Recognizing that we're up against the clock, I'd like to give the last word to Representative Sibilia or question before we change topics.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank Director Thompson and Commissioner Tierney for their recommendations around statutory alignment, which I think are key towards eliminating this year after year after year after year confusion that we have about what this plan does and how it relates to Act 71, which of course myself, the chair, and Senator Brock worked diligently to pass, which in fact are now our broadband goals, and our plan needs to that is our plan. There's a lot of measurement there. There's a lot of accountability there in terms of broadband build out. I don't think we have a cell plan. So in terms of providing those recommendations on statutory alignment and correcting the 10-year telecom statute, which I think is very important in the next session, and I certainly intend to pursue. Hopefully the administration will also bring forward recommendations on aligning the statute appropriately, given their role in this work. Just wanted to say thank you for hopefully helping us not ever have to have this confusing conversation again about what happens with this plan and how we hold people accountable for the analysis that is done in the 10-year telecom plan. So thank you.
Perfect. And thank you for coming in. Thank you for presenting this to us. I appreciate the depth and the detail that has gone into this.
Chair, we also wanted to hear from Maria regarding the issue.
If you have any new information.
I do. Take it for what it's worth, working up it again here, but So, and Hunter's correct, the $400,000 appropriation, the big bill from last year, was to complete the telecom plan update scheduled for June 2024. And that's all the language that's there. However, the statute itself still refers to the committees, the legislative committees. This committee, as you know, you do have jurisdiction over broadband networks to some extent, but primarily your IT projects, state IT projects. So at a minimum, to meet the requirement of a public hearing between the legislative committees, I think you would need to notice it on the agenda and at least invite members of the standing committees of jurisdiction to participate in that hearing. That's my quick analysis, looking at the language in the statute, and ensuring, because there's no specific reference to this committee, because the statute predates and still references committees of jurisdiction. Anyway, so I think an opportunity for the other standing committees to hear the plan would be appropriate. I understand the June, what's in statute, but that's not the department's fault. That's the legislature, ensuring that you have been informed and have an opportunity to hear.
Now, one question is whether or not the committees of jurisdiction and the House are represented on this committee at this point. Or that's an option, I would think, with the okay of the committee chairs that that might meet that without having to have yet another meeting.
So maybe some further discussion offline about how the various members, I can't make that decision.
Good.
Yeah.
Senate's represented, but not necessarily, I don't know about the House.
Or Representative Sibilia. Representative Sibilia is on House Environment and Energy, and they have jurisdiction over telecom.
And
It's a
Perhaps
good
an
idea.
offline discussion.
I'm not sure what the process is for a standing committee to meet off session since they're adjourned, but so that'll be
Mhm.
deeper dive.
However, we can help, it'll certainly be, please.
I'm confident. Always have been. Thank you. So next up, we'd like to hear from judiciary. We'll have a brief update on the network and the changes there. Rick, do you have the statute of the network update? Would you be able to give us like a
Right.
short summary of what the statute was?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. Do you want just the judiciary or the?
Let's just touch on judiciary first, because then we'll have Marcia come up. And then we can take on EDS section later.
Could you enable screen sharing?
Oh, sorry about that. That's okay.
You're finally, you're exposed. Okay, so Rick Sagel, Office of Legislative Counsel, good to see you all again. So my colleague Maria just referenced Act 78, the big bill from last year, fiscal year 2024 appropriations. So the language for the Judiciary Network Replacement Project is very, very simple. I'm on page 100 of Act 78. Under appropriations, subsection X, you have 4.68 million general fund to the judiciary for the Judiciary Network Replacement Project. And they shall update Jitoc on the status of this project on or before December 1st, 2023. I didn't see any updated language in the recent big bill that was passed. So this is the language I have for the Judiciary Network. Was there other language that you were referring to? Yeah.
And if memory serves, we met last session
In
October. So that was met, and this is just an update on how things have been going since then.
Yeah. So that's the language I have. I kind of referring back to the previous question, I don't believe Jitoc has any ability to approve or disapprove anything under this language. But as far as receiving an updates, that's where you'll come in.
And just for committee knowledge, my intent here is for us to hear from judiciary, so we have the information and can share it with our colleagues who may be inquiring. Thank you, Eric.
Why don't you sit next, please?
Oh, sure.
Maybe questions. Yeah. Thank you very much for having us. We're going to share a PowerPoint. I am Marcia Shells, the Chief Technology Innovation Officer for the judiciary. And with me, I have Joe Paquin, who has a long title, Director of IT of Infrastructure, Cybersecurity, and Support Services, and Greg Mosley, who is our Chief of Finance and Administration. And they will be giving some of the presentation. If it's all right with you, Mr. Chair, I would like to give a little update about some of the big things we've been doing this year.
Yeah.
And then we'll talk about the network replacement project and give you an update, which is a very positive update, as well as the cybersecurity protections we talked to you about last October. Most of that work has been completed, and we'd like to just review that with you. And a few other infrastructure and IT support initiatives. It's been a very, very busy year. And but we have a situation with our tech fund, which I alluded to or explained a bit last October. And I'd like to let you know the latest, and along with my colleague, Greg Mosley, tell you what that situation is going into the next fiscal year. Okay. So in addition to, well, the new network implementation is almost done. I'm gonna leave the drum roll for Joe, who, my God, I don't know if you remember what he looked like last October, but this man has lost a lot of weight and maybe a few more gray hairs, but he is a Energizer bunny. He has done a fantastic job, him and his team and our vendor partners. So that project is on schedule to complete. Very excited about that. But in addition, we put in this year, and we just went live with all dockets on June 3rd, a new digital evidence portal, which allows us to show, nowadays video and audio and high definition photos are crucial for evidence in court cases. And we did not have a system to manage that technology. Our case management system only handles PDFs. So up until we had this system, we were relying on people bringing the evidence to the courtroom, and whether it be on a thumb drive or a telephone or a laptop, you can imagine the difficulty then if it goes through the appeals process of getting that evidence to the Supreme Court. It was very clunky, very time consuming, unreliable, and it posed a security risk for us. We don't want to be taking thumb drives and putting them into judiciary equipment. So this new system allows us to manage that from start to finish with all digital evidence that cannot be contained within our case management system. And then speaking of our case management system, it was called previously Odyssey. It's by Tyler Technologies. We did the first upgrade here in Vermont to the new version, 2023 version, which is now called Enterprise Justice. And this puts us in a much better place with security. It closes a bunch of security gaps, as well as it was a 1.5-year process to set up our test stage and production environments, so that we are now capable of performing these much more quickly. And Tyler's technology is going to be issuing upgrades on a much more frequent basis, because of not only new features, but also cybersecurity risks, which is a constant battle to keep up, against the bad guys. So we're very proud of the fact that this went so well. We practiced this in our stage environment. Well, we tested it in test, we practiced everything in stage. And when we came to do the actual upgrade, it was completed within hours over a Friday night. And because they were connected directly to our new network, it literally did take hours. Well, maybe I should say, some things took minutes compared to what Tyler Technologies has experienced in the past, taking hours. So that was a good test of our new network. And then finally, we also upgraded our Jury Plus system. And if you recall, that had been an old system that we were concerned about for security purposes because of its age. And we had thought initially, or the judiciary had thought initially they were going to use the jury management product that came with Tyler Technologies systems, but it didn't fit the needs of the judiciary. So we had pivoted and decided to instead upgrade the system that we had already, which was Jury Plus. So that upgrade took place, and we now have kiosks in all the courthouses where people check in to their jury duty. They don't have to check in any longer to a person. The line moves so much faster, and everyone has been very happy with that system. So it was a busy year, and of course, but the biggest was the network project. And I would like Joe to just start by reminding us why we were doing this.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Joe Paquin with Judiciary. So part of the reason that we embarked on this project was to provide redundancy in our courthouses. When we experienced the year prior, we experienced court being canceled and delayed because connectivity had went down. So all of our courthouses now have triple redundancy. We have broadband service. We also have a private fiber circuit to each facility. And then we also have a 5G internet service. So if that fiber seeking backhoe does decide to rip up the ground, we can operate court at a much reduced capacity, but we can still continue operations. We've also deployed secure Wi-Fi, both public and private, to all of our courthouses at this point in time. And the network is full zero trust. So if we don't know you, you just get the internet. So that has been a tremendous undertaking. And my team has been, we have a very small but mighty team, but it has been a very amazing. So we've converted,
Just one quick question on the fiber and the broadband. Are those diverse paths?
correct. Yeah, as much as they can be. Some of the facilities, it's one, but we try to come off the two sides of the building. And so, thank you. Yeah. We've fully migrated all of our users to the @vtcourts.gov addresses. And all of our courthouse facilities have been fully migrated, as well as our data center. So we have our new 10 gig path out of the data center. You should see some reliability improvements in the public portal and much more speed because we have a much bigger pipe coming in to provide that service. And then this was our first day, 5 a.m. I drove to Bennington from central Vermont. We were there for our day one of the network transition, and we worked every day, 12 to 14-hour days to get this done. But my team stuck through it, and it was a great project. We're much closer now, and they're much engaged and knowledgeable about what is going on with the network. So, good.
Next slide. Kind of.
All right. Yep. So schedule, obviously, we wanted to get this done by June 30th. A majority of the things are done. The last remaining milestone is we have one final firewall, which houses our case management system and enterprise justice move happening. That will happen on the 21st. We have ADS scheduled. We have our firewall folks. We have my team, and we'll do that in the evening. We've already completed a similar firewall move, and there was zero issues with that. This will be the last remaining item that relies on the ADS network that we are moving on the 21st. Scope, we've completed everything within the scope as the goals were listed a few slides ago, and we've completed everything on the budget that we've had. So, okay. Talking about cybersecurity protections. So we talked about all the things we wanted to do, and these are the things that we've implemented this past year. So we have a SOC as a service, or Security Operations Center as a service. It was much cheaper to produce this than to try and hire staff to watch our network 24/7. So these folks watch it, they provide alerting. If anything is really out of the ordinary, they call myself or some of my higher level techs so that we can get stuff done. And if there is something that's really exorbitant, they will actually shut the network down to prevent further infiltration. We have zero trust network access. This is that whole concept of if we don't know you, here's the internet, but you don't get any other resources. We use ClearPass by Aruba. We have wildfire threat detection by Palo Alto in production. This actually uses artificial intelligence to identify not only existing threats, but actions of applications that could be threatening to our infrastructure. And Cortex is our endpoint protection. So on each of our devices, we have Cortex on. And my team watches this. I think we check it at minimum 2 times a day right now. And this product uses AI as well. And what happens is if it identifies something as a threat, it will actually tell the computer not to be on the network anymore. So it won't let it on the network until we remediate that threat. We use Intune by Microsoft for all of our endpoints. We can wipe a device remotely. So if we have somebody that decides that they're not going to return a judiciary device, I hit a button and it will wipe it as soon as it turns on again. So that protects a lot of our data. We have Unit 42 engaged, and we are building response and mitigation strategies. So if there is a cyber event, what are we doing? What actions are we going to take? And who's going to be involved? So they're helping us build all of that. We also have significant firewalling, both internal and external. So the external, obviously, is your standard firewall everybody's familiar with, protects us from the outside. But we also have zero trust internally. So my laptop cannot talk to Marcia's laptop unless it's specifically allowed. So we, nothing on our network can talk to each other unless we have allowed it explicitly. So definitely been a huge improvement. Sometimes a bit of a pain for those of you that have done that kind of firewalling before. And we have infrastructure monitoring utilizing a product called PRTG and uptime.com that lets us know if any of our public facing assets are down, as well as internal assets. We do internal penetration testing. And then once this is complete, we will complete another penetration test of our network just to test what we've completed. And then we also have our air gap protection by Rubrik in production that will protect us from encryption attacks on our network. And then as things happen, we have old servers that are being retired. We've retired about 60% of our old servers. Some of them we have a couple of things to work on, but most of them have actually been firewalled off from the rest of the network. So you actually can't get there even if you get into our network. So you have to get there a special way that's protected. So
One more.
sure.
One more slide.
Oh, one more slide for me. Okay. There we, oh yeah, here we are. So we have public access terminals. We had pretty old devices before. They are now all touchscreen. They all work. We can manage them remotely. We can update them remotely. Before, if we had to change something, I had to send somebody to 24 courthouses to manually update all of these computers. That is no more. Our sound system upgrades are coming starting in August and forward through September and possibly a little further. Our correctional centers, we've enhanced the WebEx devices. So instead of having a screen that's a little 12-inch screen, they have a 48-inch monitor that had been just finished in St. Johnsbury, our last correctional facility last week. And then you can see here electronic waste recycling and cleanup. That is our third trailer of electronic waste from the courthouses. And then us getting lunch on a very rainy day in the back of a U-Haul van. This was in Middlebury at A&W because, well, A&W was open, so why not?
So any questions?
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about when we were implementing this plan was about how it would reduce wait times and improve services for participants in the judicial system. Do you have any feedback on that so far?
Yeah, I don't have any specific data yet, just because we're still in full kind of project mode. So as things happen, we take care of them. I'll just give you an example from yesterday. I had somebody say, hey, I want to do this. Do you want me to submit a ticket? And I was like, oh, let me just do it. And it was done in a few seconds rather than the average wait time of 18 days that we had before to complete that. Our staff has seen a significant improvement, and I have talked to some state's attorneys we were in Windsor, and they had noticed a significant improvement in the reliability and speed and being able to have public Wi-Fi in the courthouses.
Oh, yes, the public Wi-Fi has dramatically improved. And this is now Wi-Fi where people have to register with their email, and just like you would at an airport. And it lasts for a month in any courthouse. So you don't have to do it every time you, like a lawyer, every time you go to the courthouse. And we had, this will prevent, we had people who were, running Netflix next door to the courthouse, from their apartment. And not only that, but the Wi-Fi was so slow, people couldn't upload videos, for instance, to, if they had evidence. And so now, we've solved that problem. So that alone was huge. And that's a separate system from the state. So we also have secure Wi-Fi that is on the judiciary network. So the judge can now go from his chambers or her chambers to the bench and not lose their session on enterprise justice, which was a significant problem we had before. The Wi-Fi alone has just been huge, both sides. And we will see that significant improvement in the performance of enterprise justice by June 22nd. So, but in the meantime, we have not had any downtime where the courts couldn't operate like we had before. So.
Before this, I recall it being like an average of at least a day a week across the courts.
Yes, because.
One would be down for.
Yes, it was because it's a very network intensive application. And it would actually crash. It crashed the system several times when the network was so slow.
Wednesdays was the day when most of the staff came on site for the rest of the state.
Please.
I just had a question about the RFP and bid process for the public access terminals in general, kind of the network upgrades. And I was just wondering if you could share how that went.
Well, the public access terminals
That's internal, yeah.
Yeah.
So we manage that whole process ourselves. So we purchased Surface tablets with some grant money that we were able to deploy across that. And then we just used
and the network project, we did, I don't remember now. It was like over a year ago. I don't believe we did an RFP, but we had several, that's right. No, we did, we had several quotes.
Yeah.
And we had an independent review that analyzed those. Thanks. Yeah. All right, so if there are no other questions about that, I'd like to talk about the tech fund. Okay, so.
Just a general question. How frequently do you meet with the Secretary of Digital Services and the head of legislative IT?
So we were meeting, every 2 months? Yes, and we've had some scheduling difficulties in the last 6 months, yes. But
when was the last time you met?
October.
Right
before the, sorry, I apologize, March, right before the last meeting we had together with AES.
And as the person who heads the data security effort, how often do you meet with your counterparts in the other two branches of government?
With the executive branch, not often. With the legislative branch, we have a pretty open line of communication as it is. And, we can reach out to both Kevin and Rain pretty frequently.
Is the absence of regular contact a potential issue? Are there issues, for example, that involve all three branches that may or may not interact one with the other, particularly if things go wrong?
I think it brings risk both to us and the executive branch because we do significant amounts of data transfer across our networks. So the lack of regular check-ins provide additional risk for that information.
What should we do in order to ensure that there is regular coordination or at least information sharing? Perhaps we create some sort of a prize for the best IT organization in state government and be awarded publicly on a quarterly basis.
We want to talk about the legislature, that legislative bill we introduced.
Yeah, so I'm going to be working with our general counsel to talk about possibly bringing forth some language for you folks about coordination across the branches for any joint systems or systems that interchange. There is some legislation in the state of New York that I think was approved last session about disclosure of breaches that also could be looked at next legislative session.
Well, I recall that before this committee was formed, at our first meeting, we asked that question, and there had never been any such meetings between the three branches of government. And there were commitments made by the leaders at that time to do so on a regular basis henceforth. And I gather that we unfortunately have not kept up with that. Would you intend to try? to keep up with
Absolutely,
that?
yes, yes, Senator. Okay, so the funding for the technology and the judiciary goes back to this legislation that back in 2007, and which established this special fund, the tech fund. And it was for the acquisition and maintenance of software and hardware, audio and video, court recordings, conferencing equipment, and the judiciary's information technology network, including training. So basically encompassing all of the technology with the exception of staff. And there we go. So the situation we are in is that the revenues, which I'm going to describe where the revenue comes from on the next slide, but the revenues have steadily declined since 2007. And yet our technology needs have increased since 2007. You know, now we have an off-the-shelf electronic case management system, and we have e-filing. We have a digital evidence management system like I just talked about. We upgraded our jury system, and we have remote hearing technology, which came to light, you know, during the need for that during COVID pandemic. So all of these are vital to the operations of the judiciary. And the tech fund would pay for the maintenance of all of this, as well as our infrastructure, our cybersecurity needs to protect all of this, our end user software like Microsoft, Adobe, our cell phones, our hardware like laptops, and any professional services like project management, because we don't have a project manager on staff, and the software that we use to run the technology services center, like Desk Pro, which runs our help desk, and then we have software that allows us to remote into someone's computer or, you know, other types of analytics. So we have no other funding for those categories. And the three sources of revenue for this fund are $12.50 from the surcharge for civil violations, $20 from the failure to answer, and $30 from the failure to pay. So this chart shows you, the blue shows the what has actually come in from those three sources since, well, we go back to fiscal year 14. You can see the general trend going down to the point where this year we're not even estimating we're going to be getting 800,000. And unfortunately, we can't.
Oh, and my laptop.
Oh.
Just-
We do have copies of it.
Okay.
No, we don't have
No.
paper copies of this,
No,
but
we
we
don't.
do have it posted online.
Yeah.
So if folks want to pull that up,
Do you want to connect from here?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
or that.
It's just this last slide.
Really appreciate that.
I don't know what slide you were on.
The next to last. There we go. All right, so now here we can see it. Greg, do you want to explain what the peach colored is?
So, hi, everybody. Greg Mosley, Chief of Finance and Administration for the Judiciary. So the Core Technology Fund, as Marcia mentioned, gets three fees that funnel into it. We run the Judicial Bureau. They collect civil violation, mostly speeding tickets, moving violations, things like that. And the fees are actually on top of the civil violations. Most of that revenue goes to different parts of state government, not the judiciary. So we're collecting on behalf of the general fund, crime victim services. You know, the surcharge kind of gets dispersed to a number of special funds. And 3 of those fees go into the tech fund, the court technology fund. And had been receiving about $1.6 to $1.8 million a year in revenue, which back in 2007 to 2014 was going to be fine to maintain the court's computer system. But as you can see, it's been going down. 2009 or FY19 was a bit of an aberration year. It was a bump in revenue. That was because we switched the Judicial Bureau from the old VTAD system over to the new system. It allowed us to send more debts to the tax department. And so we had a larger than usual tax offset year. It was a 1-year bump. And you see, if you consider that as part of an outlier, you see that the revenue has trended down. It's about 50% of what it used to be. And that primarily is driven by policy decisions. So there's been a lot of decisions about civil violations and how they're managed and license suspensions, which really drove the motivation for payment. And so the collectability of civil violations has changed significantly. And we're not the only ones that had their hand in that funding stream. You probably heard from different special funds that they're all struggling. Some of the budget items in the last couple of years have tried to address that, especially for crime victim services. JFO did a brief about a year ago, actually a year and a half ago now, about what was happening with that. And so our revenue has continued to go down, and I've been pointing this out since 2018. But every year they would say, okay, is it a problem this year? No, it's sometime in the future. And so it wouldn't get addressed. 2 years ago, I actually went to the Ways and Means Committee and asked for these fees to be doubled. And these are late fees on top of civil violations. So they're not well received. Nobody likes those fees. They did not get doubled. It would not have solved their problem anyway. But I wanted to highlight the fact that we are going to hit a wall here pretty soon. And so this last session, the governor recommended basically just put all the expenses in the special fund, the technology fund. $3.3 million is our entire IT budget, when we all know that we're going to get about $770,000 in revenue. And so there was a problem there. We didn't make a request, did not get funded. There is a contingency. The legislature put together a one-time contingency for end of year surplus, and we're on that list. There's about 22 different agencies on that list in priority order. We're number 19 out of 22. So if the year end is good for the state, we might get another 750,000. With the revenue that we expect, that means about $1.5 million of revenue for a $3.3 million budget.
So let's go to the next slide, Mike,
Okay.
please. Oh, the other way.
Oh,
There we go.
So it's a very complicated graph, but it really, I wanted to spend the time to explain this because it provides the larger context in which we've been operating for a couple of years now. So this is IT expenses by funding source. And you know, the legend is across the bottom there. It's a little bit hard to see here, but the blue line at the base of each of these bars is the tech fund. This is revenue that we've been getting from the technology fund every year. And then the gray line above it, if you focus on FY18, there's only 2 colors there. The gray line is the NGCMS capital fund, which NGCMS converted to Odyssey, and Odyssey has now converted to Enterprise Justice. It's changed names, but it's essentially the new system that runs the judiciary. And it was capital funded. It was about $10 million. And then we used some technology fund as a contingency. And we've been spending that over the last 6 years as we've converted. And that should be going away now. I believe we've spent all the capital funds. And then in FY21, we have this yellow color. This is pandemic funding. So the pandemic started in late FY20. It was March of 20. And we jumped into some of the federal pandemic funds, first with CRF, and then eventually we put together an ARPA request. But when the ARPA dust settled, we were on the outside of that looking in. We did get pandemic one-time money from the legislature in general fund. We were not part of the ARPA plan. But you can see that we've been using pandemic money for the last 4 years to help us build this footprint of remote hearings and all the necessary licensing and software that goes along with that. It was a required expansion of our IT footprint. And then in FY '23, there's a light blue line there. That was a one-time BAA request. It was about $1.6 million for a couple of infrastructure projects that they can talk about if you need to know. And then the green line is the 4.6 million in the network replacement project that was given to us last year. What that really depicts over the last 7 years is really a complex history of building and rebuilding and responding to the needs of the justice system in Vermont. And we have been spending a great deal of money on IT. But as we sit here looking at the beginning of FY '25, you can see that the dust begins to settle. Our infrastructure has been improved. We're weeks away from having that completed. And we will go back into this phase of much more normal phase of budgeting phase of slight increases every year, cost of living increases, which as you can see, our budget now is going to be to 3 to 3.5 million over the next couple of years. And it's no longer at the 1.5 or 1.6 million that we were at before the pandemic. And you combine the increased cost along with the reduction in revenue, it's both things are happening. And you see that we have a budget gap. That one little blip, so that the line across there is the revenue that we're predicted to get from the technology fund. That's about 750,000 for the last couple of years. And looking forward, there's a blip in FY '25 of that line goes up. That's the contingency, 750,000. If we end this year with a surplus, we'll have some one-time money that we can throw towards it. But you can see that the revenue coming in is not going to meet the demand of $3.3 million budget. So we have a budget gap that we're looking at that is more than a one-time fix.
Yep. So we wanted to make you aware of the situation. So we will be going forward in the Budget Adjustment Act next year to
We'll be
present
building
this
our
again.
budget in the next month or two. It starts in September, October. We'll submit a draft budget to Finance Management. We will propose a plan to solve this. It will involve hopefully the 750,000 contingency, the revenue that we're expecting, but also we're going to scrape through our budget and try and reallocate within our budget to try and keep this budget gap as small as possible. We will not get to 1.8 million. That's the gap in FY '25. We're not going to be able to fully address that within our existing budget. So either in the BAA request or in budget FY '26, this next session, there'll be something to address this budget gap.
And recognizing time, I'm going to try to switch over at 11 promptly to try to hit a noon stop time. Do you have any particular language or anything that you'd like us to forward to approach, or are you in contact with them already, or?
We've been talking with both appropriations committees about this problem this past session. It was part of our budget request, so there was conversation, it just didn't get funded. So they're fully aware of this. We haven't talked to them about legislation or any kind of wording for this coming session. We need to build our budget, hone these numbers to exactly what the budget gap problem is going to be. And we'll be letting the appropriations committees know probably in October, November of where we're at.
And Mr. Chair, do you think it would help to have some of the support of your committee to those other committees? I personally don't know.
I mean, I imagine so.
Yeah, I would think so.
What form would you appreciate that taking? Just
Yeah,
individual
letter?
conversations, like a memo from our committee? Would the committee be on board with me drafting the letter, forwarding it to folks to review, and then if we're all on board, sending it to approps?
I think provided there's some perhaps detail in the letter from the judiciary to us as to what the priorities are and what the alternatives, if any, are, and what the issues are in the event that funding does not occur. So that we have some additional background information prior to writing that letter. Does that make sense?
Agree. And Rep. Sibilia, I see your camera come on. Do you have comment?
I'm fine with that. I would just like to ask you, Mr. Chair, to detail the process by which this committee would approve the final version of such a memo.
This would be the first time I think we've done that, at least in the past several years. So I'm not sure what the process would be. I guess we can kind of choose our own. I envision perhaps working with judiciary to come up with a draft and forwarding it to all six, well, I guess the other five members, and gaining feedback that way. And if we're all in agreement, send it forward, and if not, make changes to gain consensus.
And so would that agreement, do you envision, Mr. Chair, happen at our next Jitoc meeting?
Yeah, we could probably do that. I had been imagining email or other communications, but I think we can make our final memo next meeting.
So if in fact that is how we would proceed with, coming to agreement at a meeting, then I would support us writing that memo. Thank you.
Okay. Cool. Any other questions, comments, concerns, points of interest?
Just one thing, which we have not done for a long time with the heads of IT throughout the world. We've not had a executive session where we talk about issues and problem things that aren't quite so good, or the threats and the like. Would you think that from judiciary standpoint that would be useful?
Yes, absolutely.
And perhaps the next time we have a meeting, we could look at executive sessions for the leaders of the IT organizations.
Perhaps.
And perhaps their.
Thank you, Senator.
As well.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you for your
Thanks so
time.
much.
Thank you. And right on time, I'll switch over to an update from JFO about what we just heard from judiciary, their analysis of that, and what we're about to hear from ADS. So.
We ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, for the record, my name is Lisa Govan. I'm the IT consultant with JFO. So I thought I'd start with just an update on projects and then move to the status of the ERP review that's currently underway. So if you recall back in February, this committee released the funds for the unemployment insurance project. I had committed to, once the contract was signed, to set up a schedule for getting updates from the UI project team, as well as looking at reviewing some of the issues around the current legacy system that will remain up. As of a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, the contract hadn't been signed yet for the UI project, so I haven't been able to follow up on that, but it's still front and center on my to-do list when that's ready. Around the statewide network, which I know you're going to get an update on. I know the RFP was released, and I'm just sort of waiting for more information on that, and we'll be getting an update from them. Around the DMV project, that's still on track, going great. I reached out to Commissioner Minoli last week, and she was actually at another kickoff event for the project. So she was, I know I'll hear some more details as summer progresses on that. So, and that we had an update from Judiciary Network, going great. That was a great project, and I can't wait to, I think early on when I was reviewing that project, we had discussed doing a lessons learned after the project to really understand, and it was such a great project. So I will definitely follow up on that too. So around the ERP project, the independent review was completed and released to me the first week of April. And it's been a while. Going through the project, one of the things that I noticed early on when going through the independent review was that it didn't necessarily cover all areas that are listed in the independent review statute. And in that, I mean, the independent reviewer actually said in certain sections, I was not able to fully review this because I didn't have the information. And so those are the areas that I'm focused on. The other areas relate to this committee's desire to review the project in its entirety. And so that included the original purchase of the Workday licenses, that process, the implementation contract, which is really the main focus of the independent review, I would say. And it's also, you know, and I will go over this in my review in detail, where it really does focus mainly on that particular contract. But then the other areas that would be of interest in could be kind of an increase in scope and an increase in costs, which is areas that aren't covered by the functionality of Workday. If you recall, in addition to covering the replacement of the HR system, the budget system, and Vision, the state finance system, this project also included the replacement of STARS, which is the legacy finance system up at AOT, and FARS, which is the legacy finance system at Department of Labor. Those two systems weren't included in the original Vision projects because they require that the data, the financial data is tracked at a lower level of granularity than was allowed by Vision. So like for AOT, I know the feds require that AOT report down to the town boundary level. So things like that. I'm not clear on the requirements for FARS, but I know it is a finer level of detail. And it actually includes allocating salaries of people to specific grant funds that labor gets, for example. So these are pretty complex. So, you know, this project it's a large project. There was a lot of commitment in terms of what it would cover. So by not having, for example, one of the areas that wasn't reviewed was the actual RFP where for the acquisition of the Workday licenses. And that was the one that was published by the National Association of State Procurement Officials. And so that was the cloud services contract that we had discussed back in November. So the vendor actually, in the independent review, they mentioned specifically they didn't see that the Workday contract, and they didn't, and also that initial RFP wasn't included in the list of documents that were reviewed. So all of this together, I just felt that, you know, because these documents are mentioned in the contract precedents that the state has. So in other words, if it's not included, I think the number one on the precedents is the state's agreement with Workday, any type of individualized agreement, that would be first. But it references these other contracts and even the RFP in that. And so if it's not covered in that state agreement, then the state would be subject to some of the requirements that are in those other documents. So I felt the need to do a deeper dive in that as well. And really, you know, just to give you an example of some of the things that were noted, some turned out to be more significant than others. So for instance, there was language in the actual independent review that said, they say, you know, Workday doesn't warrant, they don't warrant that they're in alignment to the NIST standards. And there's a statement on that, which is odd because it was the original RFP was for a NIST. Did you meet the definition of a NIST security agreement? And some of this could be technicalities. For example, one of the things also in the independent review is it said they would not warrant adherence to the 508 standard, which is a federal requirement for disabilities. So, you know, that an application that you use could be read by a screen reader, for example. But sometimes I've read that vendors, they can't certify it because they can't guarantee that a product created like a report, that you could make choices that would make it not in compliance with 5.8, for example. So there were definitely, I mean, it's definitely worth it to go through, and this is something that would have been done by the independent reviewer to review the required elements of what the feds require of us when we take federal money, so federal assurances, as well as any state requirements that are listed. And because these documents weren't considered, it's taking a lot longer to actually go through. And I have found some things. So at this stage, what I've done is compile my kind of top 9 areas. I sort of, I went through probably thousands of pages of documents, 1,000 pages at least, making notes and follow-up and action items. And I distilled those into kind of 9 broad areas that I considered the most critical. And so, I produced those questions. I provided them to the state on the 20th. I know they're working diligently through them. They've already put some documents out in the area on a site that I have access to that I can review them. So I think that's going, but I felt like I needed to explain why this has taken longer than normal. But I'm trying to get accurate information for you. And I reached out to an organization that sets IT standards because I think it's possible the committee might choose to hear from that particular organization about areas in this project where standards could be considered, and you might need additional testimony and expertise to speak to those particular standards. So that's where I am, but I am getting the answers. I've asked a lot of tough questions, and I know they're working through them, and everybody's trying to find the best path forward. Also, around the contract and the independent review, there were also some, I think the version of the implementation contract that was available to the independent reviewer was the February 2nd version, and that's evolved quite a bit since then. And there were parts of that contract that weren't quite ready for that review. And maybe that's something we can discuss later once I provide my review, where it details all of these elements on whether the committee wishes to do some further, examination of how to ensure that when projects go to independent review, all of the items are considered. And, but I will have some recommendations in my review. So, but I wanted to provide an update.
Any questions for Lisa? Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you have an expected date when you might have this review finished? Do you think by the next meeting that we might see it?
I hope to. Part of it depends on when I get the responses and also what those responses entail. It could be that some of my questions were, here's what I am seeing. Am I right or am I wrong? And if I'm wrong, where's the contract language where I misunderstood it? So it could be that some of these elements go away. There's also considerable questions around the finance piece on what was included, because there's been some changes over time from between when the original proposal for the implementation vendor was submitted and through the contracting process. So I want to make sure I have those changes in the actual costs documented. Now, the task for me was to review the project and make a recommendation to the committee. And all of this was for the release of it's the 11.8 million, that was allocated pending review of Jitoc. And the reason it wasn't outright allocated was because at the time it was determined that there wasn't enough information about the project that they felt they could outright, just allocate the money without that caveat for the Jitoc review. But I think when you think about this project, it is the 11.8, and there is some discussion. Well, why would the legislature allocate this money without the intent to distribute it? Well, we didn't have enough information, but it's in good faith, and I don't think anybody is questioning the fact that vision is aging and the HR systems are aging, and we want to support state government to get to the place where they have the means to replace them. But I think the overall project cost on this. I believe where is it? It was, the life cycle cost in the independent review is 87 million. Remember, the original Workday contract was about 28 for the Workday subscriptions for 10 years. The implementation costs in the IR were 52 million. When I look at the contractor costs, so that would include ADS costs too, when the contractor costs, so project management oversight, it was the implementation vendor, et cetera, was 33 million for both. So although we're talking about, providing information that you need on whether you release the 11.8 million, there's a lot more money that's sort of behind that decision as well, which is why we're providing the scrutiny and trying to get the best information we can for you.
Deal. Not seeing any additional questions. Thank you very much, Lisa. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And I would like to turn over to ADS, please.
Record, Lisa Hughes, Secretary of Digital Services.
And I'm Mark Collins, I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the Agency of Digital Services.
We're going to start with an update on the network project. I know that we're a little short on time, so
Yep.
I've asked him to talk really fast.
That's not my norm.
Please.
If there's printouts or up on the screen's fine, then I'll just walk through it. Got it in my head, so I don't need it. Okay, so you can go to the next screen. So this is about the network modernization project that was appropriated funds for last year. So we've give a little bit of background as to why it's necessary. So the state network right now is connecting about 320 different buildings/sites around the state. We have somewhere south of 3,000 network devices. That would be switches, routers, firewalls, and things. The vast majority of those devices are either end of life or end of support now or very soon. Our network itself was designed 35 plus years ago to support an enterprise that, if you recall how we lived and worked back then, everything was in these buildings, the people, the systems, the applications, our devices, everything else. Since then, mobile devices, work from home, the cloud, everything else has kind of, really changed the topology of what we need to secure as far as networks go. And also, the bandwidth that we utilize in the state, like you've seen it probably at your own homes. You a few years ago probably had a 5 megabyte connection. Now you're up to 100 or a gig or whatever. Those kinds of needs have also hit the state as well. And so we've delayed over years doing the kind of keeping up to date as much as we could. I think due to sort of the nature of capital expenditure. And so this project is as much about modernization on the technology side, but also moving to an operational expenditure model with the project too, so that we can, going forward, be more up to date, because security risks, performance needs, the outcomes and needs of Vermonters who are working with us, change, very rapidly. Go to the next slide. So the future state, and we've got an RFP out, and I'll talk about the status of that in a second, but the future state is essentially, we're moving to what's called software-defined wide area network, SD-WAN. And what that is essentially, I tried this out yesterday, so maybe this analogy works, maybe not. It worked, John. So today you have a plethora of connectivity types within your home. You have Bluetooth, you have your home phone lines, you have your internet, you have, you just got a ton of different connectivity, right? And as you try to connect things, you're constantly running around and attaching an app and connecting to this device and managing all that through very spaghetti-like connections between everything, right? So with the 320 sites that we talked about, essentially what we're doing is we're building a wide area network out in the cloud. Everything connects to a cloud presence. And then we essentially define the relationships between those sites, our applications, and our employees out in that cloud environment. So we do all the security out there. We build all the redundancy. We build redundant pipes to these worlds so that everything's essentially virtualized. So it's almost as if, you know, we treat the internet connectivity as really just a plain, simple, dumb commodity. No matter how we can get there, nothing happens until you go through this cloud environment that then needs to know your identity and credentials of your device, yourself, where you're going, what you're trying to do, and all the policies and rules that we have to maintain around HIPAA, CGIS, everything else. Those are all baked into that environment up there, and everything's kind of managed centrally.
So one distinction I'll add is the old way of doing things, because I work in this space, personal knowledge. The old way of doing things was physical cables from each location to each location. So it was a hard physical network that you could touch. And this does it through software, so you can use any connection from anywhere, and it creates a secure connection that behaves as if it was physically connected, but it isn't.
And it really suits Vermont because we have to, you know, with 320 locations, that covers the breadth of the state in terms of there's some very rural spots, right? We have dam locations where we have to monitor equipment within those. And so we really, with this, can take whatever hodgepodge of available connectivity there is and use that and manage it securely. Okay.
Ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
How does this match with what, for example, judiciary may be doing?
It would support judiciary in the sense that you know, for the applications of ours that they use, like they still use Vision, they still use the HR system. They'll be just another, you know, connectivity, you know, presence into that cloud environment.
But they're not taking SD.
They're not, no, they're not.
So their model's a little different.
Right, they're participating strictly as kind of like, you know, an ad hoc user when needed, but not baked directly.
For specific things like Vision, but
Correct.
for their core systems, they're entirely outside of this, is that correct?
That is correct.
The methodology is entirely different.
That's correct.
Is that good or bad? In other words, are we potentially duplicating things between the branches of government because we're not doing it in a centralized way on the one hand, or on the other hand, are we, you know, is judiciary better able to do what it does specifically by being entirely separate and not using common methodologies and systems?
So what it does is allows them to have the independence that you just described. They have their own system that they're managing. We've been talking about what it would look like for continuity of operations and failover. So do we have some sort of MOU that, God forbid, their system goes down? Could we absorb them into ours? We have built ours in a way that, yes, we could, if necessary. But are we duplicating in the same locations? Yes, we are. We're creating two distinctly different environments, almost like a condo, where you've got one residence over here and another residence over here, but it's in the same physical row.
Yeah, I mean, for example, there's 14 courthouses. We'll only be dropping circuits because of their departure from our network from 8 of those. So there'll be 6 courthouses where we still maintain a network alongside the network they maintain. Thank you. Move to the next slide. So this is a status. Probably surprising to us as well. The project itself really was not delayed due to the flood activities last summer. In fact, in some ways it helped us because we got a start on some of the areas that we have been trying to do, which is for example, moving to wireless first, right? So you were Representative Chase, you were talking about the hardline connectivity, and we found that during the flood, that was actually one of our problems because those buildings that had been flooded, the 21 here in Montpelier State Office Complex, we would have needed to test every single cable that had been wired into that building over the last 30 years to recover the network. And that's just not feasible, especially when there may be future flooding events. So we moved to a wireless first strategy. So we've been busy rolling out the most modern wireless network. And that really essentially allowed those buildings to come back online almost instantaneously after we got those out. But that was an early part of the strategy that we've gotten started. You see, as far as the timeline goes, so Lisa reported that we do have an RFP out. The RFP at this point is at I believe right now with the purchasing office under BGS, they have the documents to send out the intent to award to the finalists or to the company that we intend to award to. We've gone through all the scoring and the best and final offers and seen the demos of the multiple finalists and have chosen the one that we want to contract with. So, yes.
That was a public RFP process?
Yes, it was. Yeah. And it's
How many people or how many companies
respondents, I think, yeah. I mean, it was a sizable number. It wasn't one or two, but we can't really go into too much until we get to contracting. And likewise, I'm going to be a little bit cryptic with some of the language around cost and stuff right now too. But you see on the schedule, we are kind of within that window that we set at the beginning of, 6/21 of having the independent review. And the contracting, we're probably a couple weeks behind right now, but those are not, really crunch timelines. So it's not going to delay once we get to the initiation, the execution phase of the project. It's not going to delay any of that aspect. The cost that we received back from the RFPs. So our budgeting process before we went out to RFP, we worked with a lot of other states who kind of preceded us on this path. One of which is very close to our size and region was Maine. And so we were able to kind of scale our requirements and our expectations and estimations really off of theirs. And we really did kind of come in kind of very close to that mark, not over. So far, we don't have a contract, so we can't speak to a final dollar, but there's nothing to be concerned about at this point with that. We're actually very pleased with our estimation process at this point.
Senator?
I just wondered if you could update my memory. What is the ABC form?
So it's a budget estimate form that includes all the variety of costs from, the vendor cost, the ongoing cost, the internal cost of state employees, how those costs are derived so we can essentially validate at the end of the day that the bottom line number of budget, has a good logic to it.
It's something that was created as a point in time snapshot.
Yeah.
That has evolved over the years into something that is more of a working document. And so we're in the middle of evaluating how we can build greater levels of change that happen across that form, but we do use it on the independent review process. It's usually a preliminary draft when it comes to IR. It doesn't get finalized until the contract itself is ready to sign. So we have all of the accurate, so it goes from estimate to exact, and then through the course of the project, it will see some change, and then there's closeout.
What fiscal year budget is this project? Yeah, this is all RFP related, but the actual implementation.
It was appropriated last July, so it's FY24. Actually, that's really the end of it. Once I give you a status on budget and the timeline.
And it looks like the expectation is for it to be wrapped up by the end of next year.
Correct. And, for us wrapped up, we'll gain benefits of it along the way. It's not going to be, there's not going to be a fireworks display and all of a sudden the new network's live. It'll be happening. We'll be doing site by site in a lot of cases. So
Do you envision the old network being fully disconnected at the end of next year?
We do. And so give some side progress. This falls within our strategy of, also getting rid of a lot of our old data centers so that network space that you're talking about is tied to a time when the state had, I think, one time 13 data centers. We no longer, so today we are down to one primary colo facility up in Williston, and then we have two that are actively being collapsed right now at VDOL and Public Safety. Once those two that are actively being collapsed are done, we will have met that. So that's a good chunk of shutting down that old network.
Senator.
As a follow-up to Senator Brock's question, so you don't encompass the judiciary IT system. What other systems for the state government do you not?
Within the executive branch, we encompass everything.
As well as the elected officers.
Yes, but the legislature and it has its own network. And
so are there other significant outliers of organizations? I think what Senator Brock was leading to was, well, here we are, we're going to essentially develop a letter to support a budget request for supplemental to judiciary IT, but kind of wondering what other systems might be out there that are significant that could also come to the table and ask for new funding, additional funding.
If it's not the ADS network, which is the executive branch, and it's not the judiciary or the legislature, then that's it, pretty much.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Just some of the history was the legislature used to subscribe to ADS services for all of our stuff. That was a while back, and then legislative branch separated it off, and judiciary is kind of trying to do their own standalone network so that the independent branches each manage their own network, but still cross communicate.
Are there any three-letter agencies that are, quote, government agencies that are operating independently that you're aware of?
Not that we're aware of. We, over the last year, I mean, a lot to Mark's credit, we had an opportunity when former Secretary Naylor retired to do some organizational changing before he left. And one of the things that we did was we took the network team and moved them out from security and under the Chief Technology Office. Part of doing so was bandwidth, availability. Our system had also departed, and it gave us a chance to not lose traction on this project because it was so critical. In doing some of those organizational changes, we also had a chance to look at some inventorying across the board. Who's connected to the network? What are they doing? Why are they doing it? And really start digging into some of the feedback that we've been hearing about, the network's down, something's down. And I don't get those emails anymore. I don't get those calls anymore. I'm not seeing any news reports anymore, knock on wood, because now I'm gonna it's gonna be one of those, why did I say something? But it really speaks to, we made this a major priority. You all made this a major priority. We were able to get the funding, and even though the project hasn't started, there's been an immense amount of work. The flood gave us that chance to also look at how do we get access anywhere, anytime on any device, so that users can actually be able to do their work regardless of what building they're in. And it set a good example all the way around. And so far, no complaints. And judiciary is still connected to our network. I think that we're going to keep them through July, maybe August. We've been very close to their project all the way, along, because they were coming from our environment. So we really had to help them with the migration process too. So
I know there was some discussion of licensing that, timeline as far as making sure that they're
worked out great.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I could not see a migration effort and a collaboration work as smoothly as that did. So it's a lot of credit that goes to Joe and Marcia and their team.
Any other questions about the network upgrade? Would you mind giving us some insight on the UI and ERP, please?
Sure. UI, I believe that there's some internal BGS contracts being signed around project space. It may have already happened. So they're setting up a location in one of the office buildings for dedicated space for the resources who will be on the project. The contract has gone through all legal reviews, and I was actually looking for an update yesterday on when it was passed through PAT, which is our procurement review process. And so I anticipate seeing the contract come through and meeting now for signature. On the ERP side, as you heard from Lisa Gavin, we're waiting for the review from JFO, and you have the contract up to date. We had a big user leadership team demonstration that we invited legislature, judiciary, JFO, and members of various business offices, you know, CFOs and secretaries, commissioners, to last Wednesday. And it was an opportunity to go through that user experience side on what if and what can I do. And it was a full day, and it went according to Sarah and I don't want to speak for her because she's not here. It went really well. The users were very excited about the various potentials and functions that are built in to the system. We had a chance to go through, I think we've got a very strong advocate within the finance office within AOT, because there's a couple of states that are running just transportation in that. So we know what the tool is capable of. The next 9 months are going to be really critical because of including the dependency and requirement around business process transformation upfront. And then there's a whole phase of a 5-month effort around some of that planning as well before we even start doing any kind of configuration. So the next 9 to let's call it 12 months are going to be really critical around business office participation and business user participation.
One thing that I'd like to understand, maybe you can help, is the impact on the other branches. Like I know currently legislature and chair use vision and so forth. Okay. Representative Sibilia signing off. Can you share a little bit about the integration with the other branches with Workday, how that will work, and how much input you've had from judiciary and legislative branch on this process, the implementation, use, et cetera?
The project leadership team is really the ones that would have some of that direct outreach. And so Secretary Clark and I are the executive sponsors. So we're doing a lot of that top level executive messaging. The project leadership team is the one that's doing the outreach. The communication is going to be critical. The demonstration that we did started uncovering some of those areas that we need to put a little bit more effort into, specifically around how is it being used outside of. And so Commissioner Fastigi, Commissioner Gresham are going to be really critical to that because they're that prime project leadership team interface to the other branches.
Okay. And the end goal is to have an integrated product that covers the budgetary stuff and so forth. So that hopefully that'll make some of the legislative process a little bit smoother as far as transmitting information between the branches.
Yes. So the access is going to be in full. So everyone who has a user account today into Vision, into VTHR, into Vantage will have that access into a comprehensive ERP system. And it will be one login, one user account, and it will be for everything.
Okay.
So their access and their permissions and their security profile will align to their user type. There's going to be a lot of training.
Yeah,
There's going to be a lot of exposure. You're going to see flyers up everywhere, maybe even on the walls in the bathrooms to make sure that we build the awareness so that nobody's surprised.
The amount of time that Mike has spent trying to get us all to be proficient in this current system has been significant. So
Yes. So we definitely want Mike at the table.
Any other questions, comments, concerns about the ERP situation? Okay. And I had sent you a note, one of the committee members was curious about the impact of the solar storms and so forth, and network hardening and so on. Especially since we are switching to more wireless, which can be impacted by the radiation and so forth. Are you able to speak to that at all?
Sure. So I would categorize that under our business continuity planning. And with an SD-WAN environment, the importance of having any connection is going to be a good connection. And so that's going to be critically important. Also looking at identity access and privileged access into the systems. We have such a heavy remote workforce. So when you're remote, the dependency of coming into Montpelier to be able to connect back out to the cloud is what we're actually taking away. If you're talking about what if we have catastrophic impact on any connection, well, we've got a really good relationship with emergency management, and really it becomes an emergency management issue. We saw elements of this during the flood, and we had some great response, and we've got those plans built in place, and they'll be carried over into the new plan as well.
Was the question really, Mr. Chairman, did you see a disruption or did you see a weakening of the system or an impact on the system in the recent? Okay, I think that's more relevant.
Yeah, I think it was more planning for it because the event last month was pretty significant, but we still didn't see too much disruption. So just kind of planning in case there's a bigger event in the future. Okay.
So, Jared, you mind?
Please.
There's a couple of questions that had come up that I just want to make sure that ABS is on the record for as well. I very much agree with you, Senator, that regular CIO meetings across branches are critically important. And timing during session is never in our favor. And so I think that we saw a little bit of a win in that during session. There's a heavy commitment from all of us to have those regular sessions. The other piece is too, any good leader would make sure that they delegate to their teams. And I think that all of us have done so. So we've got a new CISO in place who is very much in the communicate, educate, get involved. And so his outreach has been significant. The migration effort with judiciary had quite a number of ADS folks involved. So Marcia and I, Joe, and Jim Lipinski, who's our shared services director, we've had regular communications. So I would say from having a meeting for the sake of a meeting, we're limited in that, but as far as getting together and making sure that we have response commitments when major incidents happen. We had a brief dialogue around having some security conversations about what's up and coming. So those are some, more private ad hoc conversations, and those are becoming a little bit more prevalent. Getting back to a regular stream of let's make sure that we're meeting at least for 1 full hour with a meaningful agenda every other month is on all of our top to-do lists.
It might be useful to have a method to memorialize those meetings or the content of them. That would certainly help the discipline of continuing them.
Yes, I agree.
As a follow-up to that, you mentioned the new CISO. One of the other questions I had was about the Cybersecurity Council.
Yes.
And I know that you mentioned you've got a few other things to speak to, but if one of them could be that too.
Sure, I'm happy to speak to that. So we've submitted the report for this year that was required. We are underway with a survey that has been outreached in conjunction with support of the Fusion Center, or THIC, to get out to their listserv, which is a lot of the critical infrastructure contacts across the areas that are covered. And that is going to be a state of security review. And it's completely anonymous, so there's no way to go back, but we're gonna start compiling those results shortly. I think we had over 100 respondents from organizations that are within the critical infrastructure space in Vermont. So it's a good start. We've had quite a bit of involvement and participation from those at a membership level. We don't have a lot of non-membership folks attending the meetings, so I would highly encourage that if folks interested in that to start attending the meetings. But it's already starting to create a community, a whole of state community that I think was one of the anticipations of this, and more to come is what I would say. Going well. And that kicked off before our CISO joined.
Okay.
Yes, I think we had our first meeting in January.
Is that a hand senator?
I'll raise a hand. I'll be glad to raise a hand and just follow up whether you are meeting on a regular basis with emergency management folks, because last I knew they didn't have a lot of failover. So I wouldn't want us to assume that there was robust systems on their end. If there were a severe solar storm, for example, and unshielded, connections.
So the failover plans are owned at the department and agency levels, not at the emergency, where you have to report it back to emergency management.
Okay.
So if there's a particular system, especially a critical system that doesn't have one, we would probably want that flagged, but from a network access, that would be something that we have that plan already built. Okay. I'm gonna save my ERP comments until I see JFO's final report. But I do want to say that it is not the belief of the agency or myself that statute was not followed in an independent review process. So we'll want to make sure that JFO has all of the information that they need to, come to a determination in the review. And just want to one more note. Oh, executive session you've asked about. I think that we may have to speak with the co-chairs of this committee on whether or not we go into executive session further, or if there's an agreement that is made with members of this committee on what executive session means and commitment around the high extent of the confidentiality of information discussed.
Those to have a refresher.
It is.
With the ERP thing, I know this is time sensitive project, especially for the executive branch. Could I ask for, I know there's a lot of information out there. Do you have people within the project that we could ask that help JFO find all of the details and information?
The information readily available has been answered. So out of those 9 sections, I think we've got 2 so far that have content provided already, and 1 that is missing content that needs to be sent over. So for the other 7, we're just waiting on 1 more to get it over. But we received those questions 2 weeks ago today. We get a nice review and meeting to discuss in detail to understand the context of the questions. So timing is definitely of the essence. We've been very open, making sure that JFO has full access under the MOU to every document that we have access to. And the independent review is a snapshot in time, which did start in January. So the reviews would be what existed back in that time, which is usually about 80% up to go of a contract, which also means that it's the draft ITABC. So the final ITABC for project kickoff will not be finalized until the contract is ready to sign. So that's where we're kind of working with a little bit of a imbalance of process that, over time, I think that will firm up, but it is not, I wouldn't say it would be a reason to bring concern on the project.
And for the committee's awareness, my intent is hopefully for our next meeting to hear the final JFO report and take our vote on the release of the 11.8.
Yeah. There's a couple aspects that are going to be really time sensitive here. One is if we have a 9-month planning phase with a business transformation partner and the first, let's call it 5 to 6 months of the project with the implementation vendor to be around business discovery and business process, either re-engineering or re-engineering planning, which will start hitting at a department level, that we're also bound by availability of some of the departments. So being able to do a cutover within budget has a very small window within a year. And if we fail to make progress at this point in time, we could be pushing the project off by 18 months, if not 24 months. That's a big concern of mine too. So that's why timing is really important at this point.
Any other questions, comments, concerns, or points of interest? And anything else from you? Perfect.
I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming in. I appreciate your time. And with that, I think we can adjourn and go off live unless anybody else has any